Escape Artists is on Twitch. Why don't you join us? On Wednesday nights, Alistair reads a bedtime story, and Sunday mornings, we do a few hours of chill gaming. Plus, we have interviews, special guests, pickup streams, and more. Visit twitch.tv/EA Podcasts and follow us to be notified when we go live and access VODs of past broadcasts. You can support us there too, with monthly subscriptions as well, or if you're an Amazon Prime member, you can support us for $5 a month for free. Free. Visit escapeartists.net/Twitch for a full walkthrough.
Escape Pod, Episode 945, Walking with Thorny, by Stetson Bostic.
Hello, and welcome to Escape Pod, your weekly science fiction podcast. I'm Valerie Valdez, your host for this episode. Our story this week is Walking with Thorny by Stetson Bostic. This is an Escape Pod original. Stetson lives near Philadelphia with his wife and daughter. Our narrator, Samuel Poots, is a PhD researcher and writer-in-residence at Ulster University who communicates through Pratchett quotes. He has been a dead wildling, a teacher in Japan, a tabletop games journalist, and spent a lot of time assuring tourists at the Giant's Causeway he was the new 5'4" giant due to budget cuts. He is an associate editor at Cast of Wonders and writes both fiction and tabletop games, with work published in the Warhammer Fantasy RPG and Neon Hemlock's opulent Syntax anthology, among others. If found, please give him a cup of tea and send him home via the nearest post office. Follow him on social media as Pootsy Doodle. Now, get ready for a long, meditative, and painful walk with a sharp new friend, because it's story time.
Walking with Thorny by Stetson Bostic. Read by Samuel Poots. Hitchhikers clung to Tassie's pants as he neared the edge of the forest. He brushed them off while walking and looked ahead to the open field that showed through the final rows of trees. The golden grass flowed in the sunlight, appearing welcoming and warm and easy to traverse after hours of trekking through the chill of the dense forest. He'd been careful to avoid the jagged oaks, stout trees with roots that threatened to trip and thorns grown to grab. Staring at the warm open land had become hypnotic, and Tassie lost focus for just a moment as he passed by one of the final few oaks before the tree line. He walked too close and felt a dull push, a pinprick of pain in his side. Tassie stumbled out of the woods into the grass, touched at the wounded spot, and felt the thorn. He was hesitant to look at his mistake. Instead, he adjusted his cap, matted back his hair before replacing it, and stomped his boots to rid them of any detritus. Tassie then took a slow breath and moved his hand once more to his right side, just below the ribs. The thorn seemed to be buried deep, yet touching it caused only minor pain. He glanced down, turning his eyes more than his head, and saw what appeared to be the tooth of a megalodon. A small stream of blood trickled from the puncture. The long edge of the thorn, the side that had pulled from the oak, had a wide groove that ran the length of the edge and held thousands of thin fibers. His adrenaline brought him focus, and he heard, for the first time, the vibrating song of the thorn. The sound fluctuated between a rattle and a hum, and the farther from the forest he walked, the louder the sound became. Behind him, Tassie heard the low groan of a jagged oak. He stopped, feeling annoyed and overwhelmed, and considered pulling the thorn from his side. He checked his wrist pad and calculated that he could be back to town in 40 minutes at an easy pace. Nice and steady. Just concentrate on moving, Tassie said to himself. The thorn pulsed vibrations in reply. Tassie stared at the intruder, then began to feel queasy as he examined the serrated inner edge of the curved thorn. It's my own fault, but I still blame you, he said, causing himself to release both a small flow of blood and some stress with a pain chuckle. Again, the thorn pulsed a reply. Tassie took a few steps, shook his head, then looked back at the thorn. This time, the sound it emitted was a murmur. Going back to his wrist pad, Tassie navigated to the translator and selected the auto setting. He held his forearm next to the thorn. With slight hesitation, he spoke to the thing protruding from him. Are you trying to chat, or just being funny? Waves of hair-like lines rippled, letting out a melodic vibration. The wrist pad showed the sound waves. Them from speakers played the same noise with a vaguely human intonation. I think I'm the one being silly, Tassie said. The wrist pad responded to his voice, processed it, then played a series of rumbles. The thorn erupted with excitement, every chord moving so rapidly their whole seemed fluid. The wrist pad showed it was processing, seemed to freeze, then played a choppy mix of rumbles and nearly distinguishable words. Are you communicating with me? Tassie asked the thorn, non-committal. The wrist pad cycled and played tones that closely resembled the sound of the thorn. The thorn responded, and this time the wrist pad provided a complete and fairly accurate translation. We are communicating. Tassie felt his body flush with anxiety and amazement. He tried to think of something to say, but found his mind was void of coherent thoughts. Vibrations. Thank you for taking me. Trying to process, Tassie began to walk, then stopped, then began to walk again. The tall golden grass brushed at his knees and parted with his steps. He considered ignoring the thorn altogether. Finally, he allowed himself to speak. Why was it good that I took you? I was the last of my pod. Soon I would have fallen to rot. Tassie thought of jagged oaks he'd seen, behemoths circled unevenly with thorns at waist height. Some thorns missing, pock scars, thorns lying on the ground at the base of their tree. Well, I'm happy to help, he said, taking a sharp breath and shaking his head. You may drop me wherever, so that I may grow into mother. I can't quite yet, thinking I might die if I do that. I do not understand. Dropping you now would cause me to rot. I am harming you. Just a little. Small harm. But if I dropped you, it would harm me more. So let's just walk a while. Tassie looked down and saw the thorn's threads were pulsing gently, but emitting no sound. He looked to either side of the clearing and saw other jagged oaks and the thorns that grew on them. What were you saying when you caught me? More pulsing. The thorn remained silent for almost a minute as Tassie continued walking toward town. A gentle breeze was blowing, making the grass dance like a river of molten gold. Tassie considered the last few minutes and felt grateful for the break in the conversation that was allowing him to collect his thoughts. Another minute passed, and Tassie decided to speak again. I'm sorry if I've said something wrong. A quick reply, long, purring vibrations. Being taken is happy and sad. The rest of my pod were taken by the other creatures. I do not know what you call them, but they are the creatures we rely on to be spread. I was the last remaining with Mother, and Mother and I shared much communication. When you took me, I had to say goodbye to Mother. Tassi slowed his stride as he took in the information. I could take you back if you like, drop you near your mother, after I have you removed safely in a way that doesn't lead to me rotting. We are meant to spread. It can be sad, but we are meant to spread. Mother passed on the knowledge of us, all knowledge, and I must become Mother and pass on the knowledge. I'd be interested to hear your knowledge. Many of my kind would. We are new to this world, relative to you, and so you are new to us as well. Least you can do for tickling my appendix. Tassi chuckled at his own joke. The short laugh reminded him of the blood, and he looked to his side to check on the flow. His shirt and pants were damp and red in the area around and below the thorn. I do not understand all, but I understand passing knowledge. I would like to receive your knowledge as well. Tassi nodded, realized the thorn could not see his nod, then realized he was not necessarily certain of this. Can you see? I do not understand. How do you know you are in me? I can feel you, and inner parts. I bet you can. Do you have a name? The thorn let out a series of vibrations that the wrist pad could not translate. I was not able to understand. Was that your name? That was my name. Will you say it again? Again, the wrist pad failed to translate. Tassi considered that he could try to remember the sound, but knew it was too complex for him to pronounce. Could I call you something else? Your name is difficult for me. Could I call you... Tassi thought for a moment. Thorny? There was a pause in the conversation. Repeated many times. Thorny, 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 Thorny. Another pause. I have remembered the sound. You may call me this. What are you called? Repeating. Tassi, 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 Tassi. I have remembered the sound. I will call you Prp. The wristpad did not translate the final word. Repeat it again. Prp, 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 Prp. I've remembered the sound. Tassi and Thorny continued through the clearing that was beginning to open wider as the tree lines on either side thinned and the grass grew shorter. Ahead, the river could be heard, ringing against rocks and shore to make a melody that drew and calmed like a siren. Town was less than 2 kilometers past the river. Tassi had kept a brisker pace than he had expected. The time was passing quickly now as their conversation flowed. They spoke of the creatures in the forest and the other species of trees, some of whom mother trees could communicate with. Tassi shared how he and his people came to Thorny's home, and why, but much of this was difficult for Thorny to understand. Though I am glad you are here. As they crossed the river over a bridge built by members of Tassi's town, Thorny asked that they stop, and informed Tassi that the river could be felt, that such a thing was part of the knowledge, though Thorny had never felt vibrations such as these before. So much nourishment, enough for all. Past the bridge, they came to a series of hills. Tassi found that walking uphill pained his side, but made sure not to express this to Thorny. Tassi thought back to what had brought him out today, repairs on the communication tower that allowed their town to speak to the next, and therefore the one even further away, all the way to the Behemoth ships that had been built for a single trip, voyaging across the void to land and birth a colony. Tarsi, having been born and raised in his settlement, had only seen one of the original towns once, the ones built out from the base of the ships. He had gone on a supply run when he was young, when they were still not self-sufficient, and would on occasion need refills. The printed dome houses laid out in seemingly endless rows had been breathtaking, and walking through the ship had felt like being in another world. 20 years had passed since that trip, and what he heard now about the original settlements was that they resembled small cities. Some of this he tried to explain to Thorny, but most of the concepts proved too unfamiliar. Still, he enjoyed talking, closer to rambling, and sensed that Thorny was enjoying it as well. After a moment of walking in silence, he formed a simplified explanation. We also spread, but not on a creature. We create what we need to spread. I understand. I wish I could have done the same. I am causing you pain to spread. Tarsi smiled, touched by Thorny's concern. I will be okay. Ahead of them, Tarsi saw glimpses of the lush lowlands where his town was settled, appearing closer at the crest of each hill. He listened to Thorny explain their life cycle, how a thorn would bury itself in the ground, root, slowly grow into a mother tree that would one day sprout a pod of thorns. As he asked clarifying questions, Tarsi became increasingly aware of how dry his lips were, how, even with the temperate air and generous breeze, he felt sweaty and warm. Each sip of water he took gave a moderate but brief reprieve to these sensations. More aware of how he was feeling, Tarsi struggled to follow the conversation, momentarily lost focus, and tripped. He caught himself by planting one knee into the fortuitously soft ground, sending pain up through his leg to his side where the puncture wound blared, overwhelming the nerves and sending them into gracious silence. Thorny sensed something was wrong and began vibrating anxiously, which may have caused Tarsi more discomfort had his body not already shut off those pain receptors. Tarsi brought himself back to a standing position and tried to provide Thorny with reassurance. I'm okay. You are in great pain. We're almost at my home, but let's stop talking until we reach it, so that I may save my strength. Thorny agreed. We will not communicate. Tarsi's vision began to blur. He found that if he squinted so that his eyes felt pressed from behind, he could counteract the haze. Each individual step faded into a blend of persistence as the hills came and went, and the town neared. Thorny occasionally let out a vibration no louder than a whimper, so faint Tarsi's wrist pad did not register, but otherwise restrained their worry. The town came into view as they crested the final slope before the gradual descent into the lowlands. The town, laid out in a cross, was busy with people who appeared to Tarsi's eyes as a swarm of fluid lines. Only a few of the homes that lined the roads were printed domes. The rest were made from materials of the surrounding land, shaped and smoothed by tools printed in town to resemble abodes of varying sizes. At the intersection of the two main roads were larger buildings, constructed around an octagonal courtyard that acted as a town centre. Tarsi struggled to keep his balance as he worked his way to the road that ended here, but extended and flowed all the way to the next settlement, where it connected with others to flow back to the ships. Small bushes and new-growth trees slowed his progress. His right hand held Thorny in place. Sweat poured off Tarsi's chin and nose as he breached the road and began down it to where the first homes began. Some settlers waved at him before noticing his distress. Staggering in the center of the road, his legs finally failed, and he collapsed and crumpled to the dirt, sending wisps of the road into the air. He lay with his left arm and wrist pad pinned beneath his side, using the last of his strength to elevate Thorny off the ground. As people gathered, they could see his pale color and sweat-drenched clothing. There were murmurs and discussions until finally one woman took it upon herself to run for one of the town's doctors. As the doctor, Eula Shea, made her way to Tassie, the rest of the onlookers listened to the vibrating of the thorn. A teenage boy leaned closer and while doing so, heard Tassie's faint plea. "Don't hurt the thorn. Don't hurt Thorny." Tassie awakened to the mechanical beeps of treatment. He saw Eula standing in front of a monitor on the far side of the room, comparing the screen to something on her wrist pad. He tried to speak and found that he could, his first sentence coming out in an unintentional yell. "Where is Thorny?" Eula turned, acknowledged Tassie, then finished typing something into her wrist pad before making her way to him. As she crossed the room, Tassie heard a vibration. Straining his neck, he looked to his right and saw that Thorny was at his side, resting on a small bedside table. Thorny was emitting steady vibrations, having heard Tassie's voice, but neither could understand the other's words. Tassie searched for his wrist pad, but found only sensors and an IV. "My wrist pad," he said, looking at Eula, who was nearing. "I can—" "Don't I always tell you," Eula said, arriving at his side, "every time, before you go out, when you're working for me to gather supplies, to be careful." "I can talk to it," Tassie said, pointing at Thorny. "As can I," Eula said, tapping her wrist pad. "Good to know the name, though. It's been nice talking to you, Thorny." Her wrist pad translated. "It has been nice communicating with you. I am happy Prudpa will not rot." "He will be just fine," Eula said, looking back at Tassie, who was now smiling. "Nasty cocktail on Thorny's tip, I suppose, to ensure whatever creature pulls them eventually drops them. But your blood is being scrubbed as we speak." Tassie squirmed at the thought of the little bots swimming through his veins, his arteries, blanketing his organs. "How long do I have to stay?" His hand fell to the bandage and felt the rough tack. "You're okay to go," Eula replied. She opened a drawer next to Tassie's bed, removed his wrist pad, and handed it to him. "Just take it easy. Let me finish getting your pills cooked up. 5 a day for 5 days, okay?" "Okay," Tassie said, easing himself into a sitting position. "Thank you." Eula responded to his thanks with a smile, then turned and walked to the other side of the room. Tassie watched her working for a moment before turning to Thorny. "How soon do you need to be planted? To finish spreading?" Thorny took a moment to consider this. "I do not know." "Better not to wait then. I will take you to finish." "Okay." Eula gave Tassie his pills and told him to come back tomorrow to be checked on. Both he and Thorny thanked her again, and Thorny said goodbye to Eula. She returned the goodbye, and as they walked away, she squeezed her brow in wonder. Tassie walked them to one of the dome homes near the town centre on the short road. Instead of entering, he walked around back to a small garden lined with a variety of well-tended vegetables. "This is where I live," he said. "Where you grow?" "Yes," he said, touching Thorny against the dirt. "Will this be a good place for you?" "It feels like a good place to grow." Tassie walked to an empty patch of dirt in the centre of his garden. He considered how close jagged oaks grew together, and decided the plot would be large enough for Thorny to be comfortable. He set Thorny in the centre of the patch of dirt, and eased himself down into a sitting position. I could take you somewhere else, near others of your kind. Here is where you will continue to grow. Yes, Tassie said, smiling. I would like to grow here, to become mother, to grow my pod, to share the knowledge with my pod and your kind, to have your pod one day take mine and carry them to spread. Tassie felt his emotion fill between his eyelids until a tear grew heavy enough to break the surface tension and fall to his cheek. I would like that as well. Until I grow to be mother, I will not be able to communicate. I will be under the dirt, then too small. This is in the knowledge. I have enjoyed communicating with you, Prrpa. I have enjoyed communicating with you, Thorny. I am glad you did not rot. And I am glad that you did not rot. I look forward to communicating again. Tassie's tears flowed. They wet the dirt near where Thorny would soon be buried, providing the first portion of nourishment. I will be waiting. We will communicate again soon. With that, Tassie began to scoop and brush dirt, slowly working a shallow divot into the ground. Satisfied and confident Thorny did not need to be buried deep, Tassie placed Thorny into the ground and began to gently brush dirt to cover his friend and fill in the hole. By the time Thorny, Mother Thorny, was large enough to communicate again, Tassie had helped raise the first of what would eventually be a pod of 4. His daughter was too small to communicate with Thorny at first, but Thorny felt her hugs, and knew by her vibrating giggles that she enjoyed being told the story of the day Thorny and her father met.
Once again, that was Walking with Thorny by Stetson Bostic. The author had this to say. While hiking with his cousin, Stetson noticed a burr clinging to his sock and spent the next 20 miles thinking up this story. Some stories are action-packed, plot-driven, you'll pay for the whole seat but you'll only need the edge kinds of stories. Walking with Thorny is not one of them. Instead, we have this meditative, tranquil tale about a human and a plant learning to communicate, despite the unfortunate circumstances of their temporary union. The narrative motion mimics the slow journey through nature that it describes, so that it feels like we're on our own pensive hike along with the characters. There is still tension and suspense, but Tassie's quiet, uncomplaining persistence and Thorny's innocent curiosity serve to soothe our fears and give us hope that all will be well in the end. As someone who has definitely suffered the sting of a spiky burr stuck to their sock, I can't say I've been quite so sympathetic to my thorny tormentors, but this story reminds us that even the most unpleasant seeds are only trying to find a place to take root and grow, and maybe we can help them. Escape Pod is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Don't change it, don't sell it, please do share it. If you'd like to support Escape Pod, please rate or review us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite app. We are 100% audience supported, and we count on your donations to keep the lights on and the servers humming. You can now donate via 4 different platforms. On Patreon and Ko-fi, search for Escape Artists. On Twitch and YouTube, we're at EA Podcasts. You can also use PayPal through our website, escapepod.org. Patreon subscribers have access to exclusive merchandise and can be automatically added to our Discord, where they can chat with other fans as well as our staff members. Our opening and closing music is by Daikaiju at daikaiju.org. And our closing quotation this week is from John Muir, who said, "In every walk with nature, one receives far more than he seeks." Thanks for joining us. May your escape pod be fully stocked with stories.